My robot is finally completed. What's up, guys? Today, we're putting an idle air control valve on the Civic. We're not putting it on, we're taking the old one off, we're replacing it. But the reason why I'm doing this is because last episode, when I did all that maintenance and replaced the fuel pump, I mentioned that I had some lag on acceleration. The idle air control valve, I believe, is the actual problem, and it finally showed itself the other day when the car died at idle while I was cruising down the highway. I was like, cool. I tried to start it, it didn't start, it just cranked. And then I gave it some gas, like opened the throttle via the gas pedal type shit, and sure enough, it was fine. And as long as I revved it up and kept it revved, the car ran fine. But as soon as I let it come down to idle, it would just die. So, we're gonna throw an idle air control valve on it and see if that fixes it. Side note, something I didn't know that I've learned in this process is that lag during hard acceleration or under load, an idle air control valve that is stuck can cause that because the engine is not getting the right amount of air that it is anticipating. Okay guys, here I have a brand new idle control valve for the Civic. Essentially, how an idle control valve works is you got this little flap in there. A little servo in here will allow air from this top passage to the bottom passage. And if you look here, there's our old one. Essentially, this middle cross section is right where the throttle plate sits flat. And an idle control valve is supposed to allow enough air past the throttle to keep the car idling so that the throttle doesn't have to be partially open. If this gets stuck either open or closed, it will cause major issues for just the performance of your engine. This idle control valve also acts as your throttle cooling assembly, essentially. Right here, we just have two coolant inlets, these two guys right here, and the coolant just simply goes through this small portion right here. We're gonna start by taking the old one off, and then we're going to throw this new guy on there and see how it sounds. Here I go, disassembling things. Wasn't that cool magic that I just did? This all kind of goes without saying. If you have the stock air system and you're trying to do this repair, it's gonna suck a lot harder because you're gonna have to remove the big box that sits here and connects to this tube. And you're also going to have to disconnect the big box that sits here and holds the filter. Check this out. I gotta take off these coolant hoses, which I'm not excited to do because they're not gonna fit right when I put them back on, but it's also gonna leak some coolant. And then I might have to burp the system, not sure yet. But one way to prevent that is by getting 2 pairs of vice grips and pinching these lines. That'll prevent you from having to do some stupid things. Look at that, not even bad. No even really little spray, little. All right, so got the first coolant line off. I'm waiting on the second one to just take the valve off first. I disconnected the electrical connection, and now I'm gonna fart really hard. Damn! After that, I'm going to remove these 3 Phillips screws that hold it on. Now, the problem with that is they're Phillips screws, and they've been in this car since 2002 when it was assembled. Having bolts that hold things on is great because you can get the torque you need to take them off. Phillips screws love to strip, especially when they're crusted in there. So I have a workaround for that I'm going to start with rather than trying to get them out the normal way and probably stripping them and screwing myself over. Let me introduce you to my little friend. This here is called an impact driver. What it does is it takes the force from you hitting it with a hammer on this end, puts it through some gears, and turns it into the force of twisting this a little bit to the left or the right. It's used for cracking things loose that are either really tight and you need a sudden burst for, or especially for Phillips screws that are in a spot that they really shouldn't be, like this. I'm gonna place this on the screw in question. Make sure that this is set to turn to the left. And then I'm gonna pop my radiator with this hammer. Now I have safely removed this without stripping it, which was a possibility that I didn't even want to investigate. I am going to do this now on the rest of it. Y'all see a problem here? That's pretty nasty. That fucker ain't working. That old one's crusty as hell on the inside. Part of that has to do with the fact that normally there's a hose on the normal intakes that was on this car up until 200,000 miles that goes from here and recycles oil vapors back into the intake. That's the type of shit that clogs small ports like that. I'm a big proponent of just putting a mushroom on here and letting it vent to the atmosphere and only having clean air come in through your intake. We got it off. We see the problem. I could try and clean it. A lot of people successfully clean theirs, but it is the original one from 2002, and I think it would just be in my best interest to not have to do this again, to just replace it. So here I go. I'm simply going to remove the coolant hose. Bottom port and possibly the top port where your idle air control valve actually sits on the throttle may also be dirty, and you may want to clean that out. This one's pretty dirty. See that?
Yeah.
Clean that stuff off. Otherwise, you will not be functioning at peak performance. If you have coolant hoses as fucked as mine, do yourself a favor and reinstall at least the bottom one before you reinstall the rest of the thing. That way you don't have to deal with trying to fight that on there in a tight space. And as far as torque specs go on this, I'm sure there are torque specs, but the same rule kind of applies to the Phillips while reinstalling. If you try and torque them down to some ungodly amount, chances are you're gonna end up ruining the head of the screws. And that's not really a pastime that you want to deal with if you ever have to clean this again or take it off for whatever reason. So just make them tight enough that that rubber gasket does its job and seals, and they're not going to rattle out when you start the engine. Here we going. I got it screwed in. The torque spec I used was as tight as I could get it until the screwdriver slipped one time. Now, I'm simply going to remember to plug in my connection. Those two coolant lines that I pulled off, because I pinched one and the other didn't leak very much, you shouldn't have to burp your cooling system after that small of a bubble. That is what your overflow tank is meant to do. And as long as everything is functioning correctly, which it should be, that air bubble will come right to the radiator cap, get circulated into your overflow tank, the air bubble will go in, and more coolant will enter your system, successfully making it a closed system again. Sounds better. Let's give it a sec. All right, guys. It's been idling for quite a while now. We drove it around the block, and we took it on the highway. Got a little zippy with it, and it feels better. I think that was definitely part of the problem. Not all of the problem. There's still something going on. Could be injectors. It could be a fuel pressure regulator. We'll get to that. But as of right now, it's idling a lot better, and it sounds happier. So, with that being said, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope you guys have a wonderful time working on your Civics at home.